shout out to Victor Chan for setting this up and for introducing us. He's such a great guy. But one of the reasons that we're so we think so highly of you is because your whole ethos is to be a better neighbor. And it's so hard when you're in a big city with millions of people stacked on top of each other. It's very, very easy just to think about yourself. And you have this incredible altruistic view where you want to be a good neighbor and you want to just be better. And you treat this big city almost like it's a little street with a few houses on. You really care about people. And that's just a really beautiful thing.
Well, firstly, Lawrence, I want to thank you for having me because I'm a big fan of your work. I'm a big fan just of long format, platforms to have, consistent dialogue that just really expresses not only who you are as an interviewer, but me just as your guest. So thanks.
Well, Dr. Dave, it's such a pleasure. And it's completely the other way around. I'm humbled to have you. You're a physician, you're an activist, you're a family man. You have your own farm, and you're currently running for Illinois Senate. So you're such an inspiration, because I always think there's so many excuses for people that are busy. And I've got friends that they've said to me, I want to do so much more, but not right now. Right now, my life's busy, and I'm gonna get myself in a good position, and then I'm gonna get back. And I actually always had that same approach. I was always like, well, I'll put myself first, and then maybe when my kids are older, then I can give back to the community. And you're the perfect example why that's not the right way, because tomorrow's not promised. And I don't think anyone is busier than you, Dave, but somehow you manage to wear all these different hats, and it's just that for me is really inspirational.
Well, I will say this. Firstly, time is our most precious asset. And I think if you realize that, you put such an immense value on the time that you do spend, not only with people, but within your activities and your pursuits and your passion, that you can understand very quickly, who is surrounding and around you who are not providing value to that, right? And you learn too. I mean, I'm 44 now, and I've been very fortunate to have just a supporting group of people around me, none of which pale in comparison to my wife, Alicia, who we've been together now going on 24 years now, which is actually insane to even think about. But, she's not only my rock, my best friend, but she has been that person to really, encourage me to take risks, because in life you have to take risk if you're going to push yourself forward, because really the ultimate goal, at least for myself, is to work on making a better version of myself than I was yesterday. And I think that's really important to note, that today is that opportunity to improve yourself than you were yesterday. And if you keep that mentality over time, you can actually do some really incredible things that you never thought you could do.
Well, the idea of risk, for me, I'm so passionate about. When I first started in my career, I was a trader. And they always said, when you do a trade, you always have to have two metrics. What is the risk? What is the reward? And as I got older, I realized you can apply that metric to almost anything in life. What is the risk and reward to me asking out my future wife when I first met her? Well, the risk is I get turned down, which is insignificant. And the reward is she's the mother of my children. So there's so many different metrics you can apply that to. And I just love that analogy, because we were talking earlier about the Churchill quote. And it's so true. When you're young, you worry about fear of failure, what people are going to think about you. And then as you get older, you realize that they're not even thinking about you. They've all got their own problems. But the greatest, I'm not a huge basketball fan, but the greatest basketball player of all time, Michael Jordan, we're both from Chicago. And his famous quote about he's the best because he's missed the most shots. I think that's so valuable. And I look back at my life, and I don't regret any of my failures. I only regret when I didn't really try or go all in on something that I wish I had earlier.
I couldn't agree more. I think where you are learning from your failures is really the key to not only making those same mistakes again, but bettering yourself as like a human being, right? So it'd be one thing to, take the life risk that is associated, let's say, in a relationship, like you said, right? And you, for some, reason or another, that relationship doesn't work out. But we find in settings of trauma and settings of pain that it's very easy to make those same mistakes over again if you come from that same place of, maladaptive behaviors, right? So if that relationship didn't work out, but yet you consistently seek out that same person again, rather than saying to yourself, okay, what was going on in that relationship? What was going on with myself too, right? Like, how was I not, contributing to the relationship or making myself a better person? Because that is really the ultimate questions that we should be answering when we take the risk, right? In terms of the risk-benefit ratio. The benefit is what people think about in terms of monetary gain, social gain, status gain. But for me, when I make these decisions, I really want to put careful thought into how am I going to be better in terms of the person for myself, for my family, for my neighborhood, for my community now. And I think that's really this sort of evolution of myself, is just trying to make myself just a little bit better than I was yesterday. But you bring up great points, right? Because you gotta put something on the table, right? You gotta risk something if you're gonna try to put yourself out there. And I think a lot of times as humans, we overvalue how much of ourselves we're truly risking, right? So for example, like, you're right, you could get rejected if you meet your future wife, right? But on the upside, you could actually meet the love of your life. And for me, it was my wife and I met on Halloween. I was a monk. She was a cad at a party. And had I not went out to, one of the Halloween stores literally a few hours before, my buddies in college were like, hey, you should come to this party. There's going to be a bunch of track athletes there. My wife was a track runner in college. And I was like, well, I don't have a costume. They're like, Dave, like, go and get a costume. I was like, literally, guys, I don't. So I went to the mall. I literally got a costume that I could just throw over like my like jeans and a t-shirt. So what better one than like a monk costume, right? You don't have to wear any makeup or anything, or, put on like elaborate things. And I went, but again, that took an effort of me, getting and putting a risk out for myself. But, the rest is history. But once you stop caring about what other people think about you, but then you realize that we're so inundated with so much pain and issues in our lives that even though people want to make you think that they care, they really don't. They're just going through their own problems and their issues. And I think that's a really great way to look at things, because it helps us to take those risks. You know what I mean? To put ourselves out there.
Dave, can I ask you, so you got married at 20?
No,
right?
so we met.
At 20,
yeah,
sorry.
so we met, and we've been together for 23 years now. We've been married for, and I'm going to get the death stare when I go home now, 13, 14 years?
14.
Yes. So we were together for a number of years before. My wife and I were, long distance for a while when we were, doing our education. She's an attorney. I'm a physician. So during our professional schools, we were separated. And in long distance, I don't know if you've had long distance relationships, but it's not easy either.
Very tough.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You learn a lot about your relationship, but also the fundamental basis of commitment, right? And loyalty and honor.
So one of my favorite philosophers, Gad Saad, he talks a lot about the two secret. He just wrote a book on happiness, and he said the two biggest decisions you make that are going to affect your life happiness: the vocation you do and the partner you end up with.
Yeah.
And there's something going on now where a lot of young people are not only single, but they're painfully single. They haven't been intimate in a long time. They don't ask, they don't go on dates. They're just almost isolated, and it's an alarming trend. A lot of people are very worried about it. And so someone like you that met, obviously someone like your wife's your soulmate, and I consider my wife my soulmate too, but I met her later on. Do you think that's a problem with the youth now? Is they're staying single longer, and it's almost like it's become, it's something we see in shows and movies where it's not, I don't want to say it's an ideal, but so many people, it's accepted now just to be single, and that's almost like that's the ideal, as opposed to back in previous generations, the idea was the family unit. And I think personally, I think so many of society's problems can be traced back to not having that traditional family unit.
Yeah, you bring up it's a great question, because what are we really talking about here is, one, the concept of vulnerability, right? How we are vulnerable as human beings when we engage in relationships, right? And after getting to a certain point of vulnerability with your potential partner, then you get into the realm of like commitment, right? And what that reflects on who you are as a person, right? Your character, your ethos, just who you are as an individual and as a human being. Because for me, I will be honest, I think that our seminal value of being human beings and why we're on this planet is to cultivate meaningful relationships with each other so that we can grow as human beings to be really the best of who we ought to be, right? And we can't do that just being in a solitary environment, right? And so today I think that the younger cohort, right, and I call them, they're my young colleagues, right? So when I'm, teaching at a university, I learn from them too, right? They're very much colleagues. You don't talk down to them, but you really have this active dialogue and you debate and you deliberate these things. I do believe that the younger generation has a limited ability for, or at least the opportunity for face-to-face interactions, right? A lot of interactions of the younger generation are through electronic means, right? So you lose that eye contact, you lose that physical, space, right? Which can sometimes lend itself to what I call like, a magnet that attracts, that can facilitate relationships. Do you know what I mean? So like, I was in high school before the internet, right? So if you had any sort of social, situation, it was more from like sporting events or after school activities, you know what I mean? Team-based things and whatnot. Now you can do these things all online. And what it did prevent, so it would force you to be in rooms and to learn and to meet other people you never thought you would meet.
Right. I think and the connection online, there's just so many choices, but each one is so weak. The connections are so weak. Whereas there's something about, like you said, meeting someone in person and actually sharing an experience. And for instance, you said about the idea of relationships being so important. I think there's so many people that have talked about at the end of your life, when you're on your deathbed, are you really going to care about your status and your titles and your bank account? No, all you're going to care about is the meaningful relationships that you had and the people that you spent quality time with in your life. And I always think back to that, because I'm like everyone else. I get caught up in work stresses and financial stresses and all these other things. But the ultimate, at the end of the day, I have what really matters, and that's health, a loving family, and a rich social network. And I think it's just it's so good to be reminded of that. And I'm so glad you said that. And that's one of the reasons that Victor and I, and shout out to Victor Chan for setting this up and for introducing us. He's such a great guy. But one of the reasons that we're so we think so highly of you is because your whole ethos is to be a better neighbor. And it's so hard when you're in a big city with millions of people stacked on top of each other. It's very, very easy just to think about yourself. And you have this incredible altruistic view where you want to be a good neighbor and you want to just be better. And you treat this big city almost like it's a little street with a few houses on. You really care about people. And that's just a really beautiful thing, Dave.
Oh, firstly, thank you to Victor for the space and to our introduction. I always say way leads to way. And that's a really big mentality I have in the realm of just community, right? Because, 50, 60 years ago, if you lived on the same block with somebody, and let's say you lost your spouse, you didn't have to have the same last name to get somebody to, give you some food, financial help, sometimes even taking in the kids for a little while so you could get your house in order. And now, in many realms of society, you don't even know your neighbor. And that's a huge difference just by one or two generations. You know what I mean? And that is a mentality that has been lost, I feel, in our communities. And what it's done is broke down the very framework of what a community is, right? It's helping those people who are experiencing some realm of pain. And so after, really helping out a large groups of people over the many years of my career and my life, And then this may sound kind of morbid, but it's the actual truth that I actually look at life, is that it's a very long time period where you are experiencing a consistent, painful events on a routine basis. But there are periods of time when that pain actually decreases, whether you are in periods of good health, you have wonderful family around you, financially successful, so you can actually, save and, take vacations, you know what I mean? But really, that is a period of time when we should be more grateful.
Yes.
Right? Because those painful experiences and events will come. And what I have learned is that there are individuals who can actually be there on a temporary basis to decrease the pain that you are experiencing. And what it does, it can dramatically alter the arc of that person's life. And that's really what I find my mission to really be now, is that person who is there to provide a temporary relief of some sort of pain that somebody's experiencing, so that they can be the best of who they are at that time, which can invariably affect their arc of their lives. So I've done it in a variety of ways, whether it be through, providing free healthcare, or feeding people, or burying, murdered children, or passing legislation that really affects our communities. I think these are really important ways that I'm not there to consistently hold somebody's hand. I'm not. I'm there to create a situation whereby somebody who's experiencing overwhelmingly challenging, painful situations can actually breathe a little bit, to get back to work, to, get a meal so that they can get to, have a better opportunity to feel better, health-wise. Right. Or even, the many moms and dads that I've talked to who've had their children tragically ripped from their lives forever because they've been killed by the senseless gun violence in our city. What do you say to them, right? You have an empty hole in their hearts forever, right? But what you can say is, look, let me get you a place, a sacred place, that's your place, where you can go and visit your murdered child, so you can talk with them, you can be with them, to help you, from this tragic grieving process into a mourning process, which can help you maybe get back to work, to get a paycheck, to feed your other kids, to, get up in the morning, right? And I think that's the mission that I have really sought to undertake until, quite frankly, until my last breath, and that may be tomorrow, right? We never know. And again, that goes back to your time is your most precious asset. Why wouldn't I try to do that? So I consider myself very fortunate to even be in the position to even do something like this. So,
well, let me just give you another perspective, Dave. I work with a lot of doctors who invest in real estate, because I work in real estate and I do a lot of investment properties. And a lot of doctors, I think the ideal of being a doctor is wonderful, right? Your whole raison d'etre, as they say, is to help people. That's the ideal. But a lot of doctors in reality, especially, higher up surgeons and things like that, they tend to be very arrogant and very wealthy, and they're not thinking about too much outside. They're doing their job, but outside that's good enough. They're getting themselves in a really good financial place. And so a lot of time I kind of have to argue or go back and forth with them, because I'm trying to tell them, you're an incredible surgeon, but I don't try and tell you how to do liver surgery. This is my realm, and you're trying to argue with me, but you don't actually know anything about investing in real estate, so please listen, because we're on the same team. And I've had a lot of these conversations. You're an incredible exception, because you've gone so much further than just doing your day job. It reminds me, when you were talking, I was thinking about that wonderful quote, a healthy man wants 1,000 things, but a sick man wants just one. And health is something that you very rarely appreciate until you don't have it. And every time I'm under the weather with a sickness or something, I'm lying in bed and I feel absolutely awful and my body hurts, I'm always like, when I feel good, I'm going to appreciate it every day. And of course, life goes on and you forget, but it's something every morning you wake up, and if you're not in extreme pain and you have some measure of health, you should be grateful and start the day happy, because it's so true.
Yeah, and on that note, I am going to put a shameless plug for everybody to start a gratitude journal every morning. It's something that I've, done consistently for many years. And to be honest, sometimes it's just a few minutes. I try to do it first thing when I wake up, and it's to jot down just a few thoughts. I'll date it of, yesterday, of what I feel grateful for. And sometimes it's really, centered around, health, as you say. Like, there are many things that we just don't take, that we take for granted, that we're not thankful for on a daily basis, like walking, talking, eating, seeing, hearing. Just people don't realize, just because, I call it the burden of knowledge of being a physician, but like just taking a shower and getting dressed in the morning and combing your hair, what a complex neurologic process that is, that requires such fine motor skills that so many people who, let's say, who've had strokes, who just can't do, and that they want to do. Do you know what I mean? And that's the complexity of just the human experience in itself. But my point is that gratitude journaling allows you to experience the thankfulness that human beings should have on a regular basis in order to go and attack their day, right? Because if you realize what you have, right, what you're thankful for, you can really become more resilient on the challenges that you're going to encounter, not only in your day, your week, your month, your year. And what it does, it just helps you to become a better person, right? Because those who are humble, those who are grateful, those who are thankful, those are the people I want to surround myself with, right? Because, as you said, right, like power and money and tangible wealth, and that can really go to one's head, right? That's like their purpose, their goals.
Exactly.
So gratitude journaling. I'm going to give a shameless plug for that.
Well, thank you for reminding me, because that's something I've done on and off, and I've been a bit off recently, so I've got to get back to it. I always think, we're exactly the same age. We're both 44, and how much do we take for granted today that if we make it that long, our 74-year-old self would be so, just every dream would come true to be back and be in our body right now at 44. And I really think that's something to consider is, your future self will be so jealous of the opportunities you have today. So don't squander them, and you definitely don't squander them. David, can we go back and start a little bit when you obviously graduated medical school, and did you go straight and set up your own practice, or how was the process?
Yeah, great question. So, I've been in Chicago for 20 years. Originally, I'm from downstate Illinois. So my parents were immigrants from India. I was born in Peoria, Illinois. Which is literally, if you threw a dart right in the bullseye of Illinois, that's where Peoria is. And then we moved down to Bloomington Normal, which is a little southeast of Peoria, still in central Illinois. So we were, surrounded by cornfields, right? And so, but we were one of the first Asian Indian families in the Midwest there, and so we had our fair share of prejudice and challenges too, but one of the things that I didn't lose was the acceptance of being somebody who was culturally different into a city and community that were really neighborly, to be honest. I think that's where I first, received that goodwill, where families down the street would play with us, give us meals, and just show us the ropes of like any immigrant family, you know? And to circle back of like, the education you get here as a clinician and a physician is the fact that you have a diverse patient population here. You know what I mean? It's not homogeneous.
Yes.
Even though you can make the argument that Chicago is one of the most segregated cities on the planet, we are very, very diverse. Whether you're in the Polish neighborhoods or the Hispanic neighborhoods that are broken down into different, Hispanic populations too. We are a diverse community. And I think that's one of the things that really drew me to the city during my training at UIC here in Chicago we treated a number of patients who were from really, really poor backgrounds.
Yes.
And you see the health disparities, right? So you see really people having access to healthcare issues, food issues, education issues. And I think that's what really spurred me to stay in the city, because I wanted that experience as I became a more higher level physician. So I graduated medical school, and then I stayed for residency at Rush Medical Center here in town. I was trained in internal medicine, which is a general medicine residency for 3 years. Again, seeing this consistent patients. But it was after that training that I went into my training of allergy immunology. So it's a subspecialized field. And I was fortunate to train both at Northwestern and Lurie Children's. So in that field, you actually see both children all the way to adults in my field. It's a very small field. It's actually one of the smallest fields in medicine. And I think that was when it hit myself over the head to say, look, it's hard enough to see a doctor these days, right? Even if you have insurance. But if you don't have insurance, it creates these, what I call like these hurdles that really are as big as mountains. It's just really hard to, let's say if you had lung issues, to go and see a pulmonologist or an asthma specialist to get the right medication. And I think after I finished my training at Northwestern Lurie Children's, I had the desire, and that seed was planted to say, you know what, if I can create some sort of free clinic, I'm going to do that. But first you got to make money, right? And you have to support your family. And so I had 2 small babies at the time. So veterans are a huge thing, not only in our family, but they have such a special place in my heart. So I took a position at the VA hospital here in Chicago, where I was just grateful to provide the care to to our veterans who go and serve, and fight for our country. And so there was a lot of core issues in the VA system, but most importantly, I got to take care of the veterans. And again, I don't want to bemoan this point about risk, but after working there for a few years, I said to myself, look, I could continue on this path, have a rewarding job of taking care of veterans, or I could take this risk of creating a free clinic and serving who I really feel are the most, needy patients in our communities. And so I went home and I talked to my wife and I said, hey, look, I think we can create a free clinic that is responsible in terms of our, overall budget. I feel if we partner with the right people, because I know that the major cost for us is not only our space, but our inhalers that we need to get to patients. But I know that if we start small, if we take care of one patient and we get them the care they need, then we've actually done a huge service, because it proves that we can do it. So she said, well, what do you mean? Do you want to quit your job? And I said, well, I could take less hours, still get, some money, but we can take our nest egg essentially and to put it into this foundation. And that's what we did. We started our nonprofit. It's called the Strength to Love Foundation. We've been around for, going on 5 years now. And the first part of our foundation is around the Strength to Love free asthma and allergy clinic. So it's in Roscoe Village. It's on the corner of Belmont and Levitt Avenue. All of our patients are uninsured. So that's a requirement, actually. We don't take, if you have Medicaid or Medicare, we can help you get to see an allergist like myself, but really we need to only see uninsured patients. And so when you walk into our clinic, everything is free. So even though I'm the janitor, the nurse, the attending physician, I do a lot of, I wear a lot of hats. I see the patient, I do all of the necessary lab work, testing, and to come up with a diagnosis and a plan for them that often requires a lot of, at first medications, right? Mm-hmm. But we really stress continuity of care so that our outcome measurements are great. And we've been consistent in that. So we've had patients that come in who have no insurance. They're suffering from debilitating asthma. They've been on medications like prednisone, which are systemic steroids, right? And they've missed work, they've missed school, and they're literally living a debilitating life. And within a few months, they're not only back at their job, we've gotten them on a great treatment plan to whereby they're just living a better quality of life. And it's just been so rewarding. I mean, I couldn't tell you, going to sleep at night knowing that one person has changed the arc of their lives, right? And I think that's that seed that was planted, right? That has now grown into where we've really broadened our approach of who we're helping.
So, I mean, that's incredible, Dave. But financially, did you do both at the same time? So,
Yeah,
gotcha.
to save money. And from there, we've been very fortunate to not only, consistently make sound investment advice and implement sound investment advice into wonderful, rewarding decisions that have really blessed our family, right? To whereby you could say to ourselves, well, you're continuing to become more wealthy, why don't you save that wealth, pass it on, or grow that, versus taking that wealth and giving back and investing into our community. And that's exactly what we have looked at our free clinic, right? So we started with one patient and we've grown. And what we have done is consistently over the years implemented a very lean operating budget with limited staff. But what we've created is a partnership with, let's say, our wonderful pharmacy. I'm going to give a shout out to New City Pharmacy. It's a local small business owned pharmacy that have given us our inhalers at cost for many years. And they do this because they believe in our mission, right? Yes. And so if you look at, let's say, our lung outcomes, right? People's lung function has improved. Their quality of life has improved. Their days missed at work and at school have decreased. And so if you look at the financial burden that we have removed, right, from not only our healthcare system, but our society in general, just from a free clinic model, we can say, okay, this is something that works. We are providing a safety net, because to me, healthcare is a human right. This is part of that human contract of being a human being, right? With whoever you believe in, that when you are born, you should be entitled to healthcare. And unfortunately, in our society here in America, there's a huge group of people who are failing at getting the access that they need. And so we're providing it. And that's really the model that we've taken in our other programs. We start small. We implement a small pre-pilot program. We look back reflexively at what works, and then we scale up. That's it. I mean, there's no, you ask me like, hey, Dave, what's your secret sauce? That is the secret sauce.
That idea of having a model that works, but starting small and then scaling up, that applies to almost everything. That's the perfect way to do it. Because if you try and be too huge with your goals at the beginning when you haven't really figured out the logistics and the business model, and then you're going to encounter problems, and then you're going to say it's not working, I got to pull out. So you obviously have a proven business model because you've done it so many other things. Most people, two things. Your wife is obviously a soulmate and a saint, because a lot of wives would have said, are you crazy, Dave? We have kids. That's our nest egg. Or what happens if something happens to us? No, I think we should, think about ourselves. So the fact that she was all on board just shows how wonderful you are, just your character, both of you, how that is unique and incredible. And then, as if that wasn't enough, I know you touched on it earlier, but your passion behind helping children of gunshot victims, and I just that for me is the biggest. There's so many different things, causes people can get behind, and for me, one of the saddest things about Chicago, because while I moved this year, I've been here 21 years. I consider it my home more than England now, and I'm very patriotic towards America and Chicago. I want Chicago to succeed, the city, and the just prolonged gun violence year after year after year. No one can seem to figure it out. It's so sad to me. And I used to think, well, the statistics are a lot of time it's gang on gang crime. And for me, that doesn't pull at my heartstrings too much until I heard from you about how many just innocent children are killed in the crossfire. It's just so tragic. And your story all started with, I think it was a child in his bedroom that got shot.
Yeah, this was... I'll give you two examples, but one quickly. So my wife and I volunteered in an after-school program, and it was in Cabrini. And one of the 8-year-olds that was in our program, he was actually walking home and there was gang crossfire. He got caught in it and died. And a couple of days after, right, this tragic loss, the volunteer coordinator came to all of us at this after school program and said, hey, can somebody chip in, to help bury this child that's among us that was one of our students? And Alicia and I, was my wife, we got together and we said, look, we need to pay for the burial. So we did that. We paid for the entire burial. And it wasn't until a few months later that I get a call. It's on my cell phone, block number, and it's actually the mother of the child. And they say, hey, Dr. Dave, I want to let you know something. You paying for the burial of my child allowed me the process of getting up in the morning, showering, and making that trip to his grave, because I actually was going to have to cremate him. The GoFundMe page came up woefully short. And me getting there to his grave and spending time with him gave me the opportunity and the heart and the desire to get back to work. It allowed me to get a paycheck to feed my other children. So thank you for that. And I almost stopped in my tracks there, because it hit me on my head to say, look, if we're impacting the arc of this person's life who literally has lost their child tragically to gun violence. It wasn't as if the mother was placing the child in a bad situation late at night when that person should be, in a more responsible environment. This child was just walking home in the afternoon. And it really registered to me that we need to do more. And that's when my wife and I, me especially, so anytime any sort of murder that took place in the city of a child by gun violence, I would try to reach out to typically community spokespeople, right, who end up becoming family representatives. And it would just me perusing the media and social media to figure this out. And many times, sometimes when I would call, they would never get back to me. But in the beginning, a few people started, and I would say, hey, look, this is Dr. Dave. I, have this nonprofit. We have capital to help families bury their child, because we know that these GoFundMes are coming up short. And you start to gain these connections, and we started to bury child after child. And then you realize that the average of 92 children a year in Illinois under the age of 17 are murdered by gun violence. And that number is continuing to rise year after year. And then you start to realize, and you ask these questions, hey, if the community can't raise enough money to bury these children, and no parent should have to insure their child. Okay, exactly. No parent should have to insure their child. So what is the state doing? And I realized that the state had a program, and it was intended for good purposes, but because of logistical hurdles, it was difficult for families to engage in the program. It was basically a reimbursement program. So no matter what, you're coming up short having to cremate the child if you don't put up the funds.
Yes.
So I reached out to a wonderful activist who is now a dear friend of mine, Pastor Mike Flager, who is the head priest at St. Sabina. And I said to him, Father Mike, I have an idea. I think we need to get these funds to the families within a few days. That's all the time we have. I want to take the existing burial program and write a law that allows these families to receive that money not in a reimbursement program to them, that they don't have to put up any money so that they can get the funds they need to bury their child. And he said, we have a wonderful senator, Jackie Collins is a parishioner. I can open that door for you, but you need to do the rest. And so I went to Senator Collins and I presented my idea of how logistically we would write this legislation. I gave her and crafted it myself. And she said, Dave, this is something we've been seeking in our Black and brown communities for years. We just haven't been able to do it. And many times you just don't realize it, right? As legislators and leaders. But we did it. She passed it through the Senate. She was my champion. Rep. Camille Lilly in the House, and the Governor Pritzker, signed that bill from my idea into law within 4 months. And thankfully, now any family in the state of Illinois, if your child is murdered by gun violence and they're under the age of 17 and you meet the income criteria, which the vast majority will, you can get $10,000 within 3 days to bury your child. And I think it was just one of these wonderful, while it's terrible that we have to have this law, right?
Yes.
It's absolutely terrible. And I think that's the real conversation we should be having. Like, why do we have to have these laws? Number one. Number two, where were the legislators over the last 20 years in these black and brown communities? Why did it have to take a son of an immigrant, right, who is not living in these neighborhoods where gun violence is affecting, to have to write this legislation to pass it? I think these are the questions that I've been asking too as we start and are really deep into now campaigning, right? We need elected leaders to step up, to understand the pain that these communities are experiencing, our communities are experiencing, in order to effectively write pivotal legislation. So this bill, it's called the Michael Moultrie Act, and I named it circling back to the 4-year-old that was tragically killed in his bedroom. Michael was a 4-year-old, a wonderful, beautiful boy who was tragically taken. I named the bill after him. We helped Michael's burial too. And now this bill doesn't sunset. What does that mean? Long after I'm gone from this earth, the Michael Moultrie Act will be here in the state of Illinois. But I also pose this question. Why do we have to just include children who are killed by gun violence? There are many other, not only children, but adults who have been tragically taken from us, whose families are burdened by the financial and emotional burden to bury their loved ones. And that's something I cannot tell you how immensely painful that is, to lose somebody, but lose somebody so tragically. That why can't the state do more? We should do more. We're obligated to do more for our communities like that. And that's something that, as a senator, that I'm not going to stop, because that's something I truly believe, that every human being should have the dignity to die in a way that is pain-free, surrounded by your loved ones, but also after you're gone, that your loved ones can honor you in a way that they want to honor you. And so many families don't have that ability.
That's so incredible. This is one of the reasons I love these type of conversations, Dave, is because I would have never thought of why a burial versus a cremation, the difference. But like you said, that example, it didn't just help the mother, it helped her other children. The whole family unit was dramatically helped and saved by the act of a burial, a place to go, a place to visit a loved one. As a father of a young boy, my grandfather lost one of his children, and I remember at his 60th wedding anniversary, he gave a speech before he passed away, and somehow it came up, and he shed a few tears, and he said something like, "You just never get over the pain of outgrowing your children." And hopefully you and I will never have to experience that, but I can only imagine the pain. And then just in those communities, you're dealing with the logistics of, you can't afford the most basic thing, which someone like you and I wouldn't be a problem, is a burial, and how that can change their life. And it's just,
Lawrence, I'm going to talk to you about two things. One, the conversations I've had with mothers and fathers and family members who 24, 48 hours lost their child, who's now in the medical examiner's office, have been the most difficult conversations I've ever had in my entire life. And I've had to pronounce hundreds of patients who I lost in the hospital, and to go out from the room to say to their loved ones, "I'm sorry, but your father, your mother, whoever it is, has died." And to give that news is really difficult. And those families, they don't really remember my name or who I was or where I was, but they remember your face. But these conversations that I've had with family members who've lost their children to gun violence is necessary conversations, because it centralizes around the pain that people experience. So even going even further, right? I've had conversations with mothers that we couldn't get to bury their child because through some sort of difficult communication with the families, etc. And they ended up cremating their child, but they wanted to bury them because they didn't have the money. And they would say to me, Dr. Dave, you don't know the pain that I experienced knowing that the urn is there at home by their bedside, and which is a constant reminder of the financial inability for them to bury them. And they walk around with this pain that's not a wound that is scarred over and healed, but a wound that just is gaping every day to remind them of their inadequacies, right? And giving somebody the opportunity to bury their child when they want to, right, is honestly, it's our responsibility
as a society,
as human beings, as people part of communities, no matter what. This is something you want to get right, just like you want to, like, two things you really need to get right, maybe three. One, your birth. Two, your death. And three, if you choose to enter, the bond of marriage, you got to get that right too. And some people don't, and some people choose not to enter in that. But, the birth you can't control, right? The death is something that I've seen a lot of, and it creates a big impression on me that you can understand that time is your most precious asset. And so when you ask me, like, Dave, how do you do all these things? Well, firstly, it ain't work if you love it. But secondly, I have a deep desire to engage in activities that I feel will help people experiencing pain. That's it. From morning till night, things that are in my head are trying to figure out, how do I reduce somebody's pain so that they can live a better life? That's it. And when you're thrusted into situations where you get more responsibility, because that's really what this is, right? You risk having more responsibility. And in that role, you can figure out, okay, number one, how do I thrive and take on that responsibility in order to help those that are around and fulfill my obligations, right, in that role? So as a physician, as a nonprofit person, and as a, to be honest, as a person who is writing bills as a private citizen now, not many people, and it's not lost on me, to be honest, not many people who are private citizens pass laws.
Exactly.
That's the truth, right? But I don't look at it like that. I look at it like, this is our civic obligation. And if private citizens like myself are wanting to step up, our legislators should be embracing that, right? Because if they're not doing it, why wouldn't we outsource it to somebody who can? Unfortunately, many legislators in our current governmental framework is dependent on lobbyists. Lobbyists tend to have more self-interest. And that doesn't create an environment of, looking and passing key legislation that's going to benefit our community as a whole and to reduce their pain. And I think that was really one of these things where I said to myself, man, if I can do this as a private citizen, imagine what I can do in the seat.
Yes. Well, we're going to talk about that. But Dave, listening, when I listen to you talk, I'm reminded of that story about those two guys walking on a beach, and there's hundreds of starfishes that have washed up on the shore, and they're going to die in the sun. And one of them's just picking up a starfish, he's throwing it back in the sea. And his friend says to him, like, why are you bothering? There's, hundreds and hundreds, we're not going to get to them all. And he picks up another one, he throws it back, and he says, well, to this one, it made a difference. And I think there's something that we have where when you have 2 or 3 neighbors on a street, it's much easier to say hi and to be a good neighbor. And when you're in a high-rise with 300 people, it's a lot easier just to shut the door and not even talk to the person next to you in the hallway. And in these big cities where I think it's very unnatural, I think with Dunbar's number is a couple of hundred people. We evolved to have a couple of hundred people close to us, and we're not, our bodies and our brains are just not evolved to deal with millions of people in a couple of mile radius. And it's so easy just to be selfish and look at you and not worry about the rest of the people around you. And you're such a good example of the power of one person. Like imagine, you know, you must feel so proud, Dave, when you go to bed. You're 44 years old. You're still a young man. You're in great shape. How much difference you've made just already, and how much difference you're going to make moving forward. I just find it really inspirational. And
Lawrence, I'm going to be bluntly honest with you. I don't think about it. Sometimes, my wife will like literally pinch me and say, "Look what you're doing." There are key moments that I will look back in sort of, let's say, the same day or the next morning to see what we've done. So for example, I love to feed people. Like that's my jam.
right.
I love to feed people. And what I realized too, just being in and training many, many patients and communities who just don't have access to fresh food, that they have just crazy amounts of diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. And what that does, it lends for them to lead shorter lives, and it doesn't allow them to be the best of who they are.
Well, I really want to talk about that's the next step in your evolution. But so many the American healthcare system, to me as an immigrant from England, and England and America share a lot of similarities, but they also have a lot of big differences. And the one big difference in America is I saw this with my old trading business partner. He was in his 30s and he was drinking a lot, and he had a few issues, and he went to the hospital. He went to see a doctor, and the doctor gave him a whole list of all these different drugs, completely screwed him up. And they said the one thing he can't do on these medications is drink. He kept drinking. He had a complete breakdown. We ended up splitting up the company. He was my best friend at the time. He's like an older brother to me, a mentor. And it was almost like an early divorce. It was very, very painful for me to go through. It cost me immense amounts of money and stress and pain, because he was such a close friend, but he completely screwed me over because of all this medication. And that was my first exposure to the American healthcare system, where they're just going to throw all this medication at you that's going to completely rewire your brain, a lot of time for the worse, going to have all these horrible side effects. And what you mentioned earlier, you mentioned two things which really stand out to me. You mentioned the lobbyists. So we're going to talk now about the food lobbyists and how the incentives is to get people addicted and put sugar in every food and just high fructose corn syrup and all these different things that are terrible for your health. And the fact that if you can help people change their diet earlier, it's gonna be a much better way of, as opposed to waiting for them to get all these issues that they're going to get from years and years and years of bad diet. And typically you see this. I think you mentioned in another podcast about food deserts. I heard it called something else, because there's plenty of food in bad neighborhoods, but it's terrible food. It has no nutritional value. Yep. It's cheap. It's it's containing every bad thing that you don't want to eat if you want to look after your health. So I think that's just again, coming back to the idea of me as a citizen, like I'm thinking, well, what the hell can I do about this? And you had that same thought, and you had the most amazing plan.
Well, firstly, our healthcare system in America is very reactionary.
Yes.
We're not proactive in terms of preventing illness. We look at illness as a effect that we treat, instead of actually looking at the root cause, which is essentially the definition of insanity, right? You literally try to do something the same way and expecting different results. It's insane. It really is. And that's how we approach the patient, which is really, if you look at what the system of, let's say, billing in a hospital system is, a retained value unit, right? A patient is not really a patient when they walk in the hospital. They're just a unit of billing, instead of actually looking at them as like human beings who we should invest in, and to look at their causes of why they're walking into a hospital or a clinic or an emergency room or an urgent care. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And what we're trained to do, because we're so pressured in how many patients we see and what billing, coding we do and how much revenue we generate, that it becomes, reactionary from the doctor. I'll throw a pill at something because I know it lowers, let's say, whether it's, their glucose, right? And you have diabetes and your glucose is high. Well, I can give you a medication that controls the glucose instead of saying, man, you're eating, half a dozen donuts and drinking a 6-pack of Pepsi every day. That has, grams of sugar that are causing your glucose to go up. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, instead of actually providing them, hey, let's loop in a dietitian and let's break down what we should be eating and drinking, right? And that's something that has been very backwards in our healthcare system now for a generation, at least, right? And so this is, circling back to what I saw in my free clinic, right? You have a very at-risk group of patients who are uninsured, who walk in and are really suffering from the ill effects of diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. Now, as an internal medicine doctor, you're trained to say, okay, I can treat these with a medication, but really it's diet and lifestyle management. But then if you look and you talk to your patients, just as you said, when you ask them, hey, like, do you have any grocery stores around you where you could actually, let me give you a simple recipe that you could get this fresh food and you can actually cook it. And then you learn a couple of things. 1, I don't have a grocery store nearby. 2, I don't even have a stove. 3, I couldn't tell you, how to put anything together, even if it's just salt and pepper and a little, oil. You know what I mean? And so then you're thinking, wow. And then on top of that, they'll tell you now in these, post-pandemic price escalation that it's much cheaper to go down the street and get, a meal from Burger King. And I'm not, saying Burger King is, but I'm saying fast food. Right? Filled with, unsaturated fats, a lot of, fatty foods, right? That lends itself to the easy way, right? And what happens is let's literally take that decision mindset and exponentially scale that up. And that's what you're getting in large pockets of society in America, that we have consistently created this problem without going after the root causes. And for me, it's access to fresh food. We need to get fresh food that is healthy into these neighborhoods and teach them how to use the fresh food, right? Because you could deliver fresh food to communities. But if you don't know how to use the fresh food, it's honestly going to spoil and go in the garbage. Exactly. Just like 40% of all of our food in America is discharged into the trash. And we can talk about food rescue, but I want to talk about just food. I call them food apartheids. We call them food deserts. I call them food apartheids. Because if you look at it, it's a consistent generational challenge that these neighborhoods and communities have at accessing fresh foods, right? So, for example, look, it's, grocery stores have very small margins. You're going to put them where you can maximize your margins, whereby people are going to pay more for a price of, let's say, an apple versus somebody who's not. And you're going to put corporate grocery stores in areas where you can maximize your profits. That's how it works. Yeah. But we can create a system, and it's been done before, where you can put grocery stores in these areas. But that's the issue here, right? Because that takes time.
Well, Dave, there was actually a fantastic statistic. So I remember just being in real estate now for the last 10 years. From what I always heard, that one of the worst areas was Englewood for violent crime. And since they put the Whole Foods in there, which I'm not sure exactly when it was, or close to Englewood, now it's not the worst in Chicago. I think it's Garfield Park now or something. But it's basically changed the violent crime by putting a big grocery store in that area.
It is, but the problem now, the whole these grocery stores that had really favorable tax structures that are lapsing, incentivizing. So some of them were on a decade plan where those tax incentives went away. So you saw in some areas of the west and southwest side of Chicago, Whole Foods left. And you saw instantly that the access to these fresh foods went away. And so now what we're learning too is that in not only the access to food from, let's say, a corporate grocery standard, but community gardens, from churches, from people who have the ability to grow it if you give them the resources, right? To become food pantries, to become community gardens. These are the things that we know now. The data is showing that if you really know, for example, let's say, Sarah and John, for example, make a community garden down the street in a really food apartheid area.
Right.
And they're growing some really great, let's say, sweet corn. And on Saturdays, during the summers, they're giving out their sweet corn, or you could buy an ear for, 20 cents. And now you can get it instead of having to take 3 buses and 1 transfer while paying, $2 for 1 ear of corn that you don't even know is fresh. But at least Sarah and John down the street, because I went to school with them growing up, or I go to school with their kids. So you trust them.
Right.
And then you get access to that corn, and then you cook it on the stove or even grill it, or even just eating it off the husk. And you taste it and you're like, man, I really want some more of this. And that's exactly what I had really thought that was the model that we should do. And so a few years back, we tried to put a grocery store in a high school, which data supports in Texas that if you get the kids involved in a food apartheid area, that there's staff there and that they have, working in the school grocery store for credit, and then you work with their families about their needs for food, you can get really great outcomes longitudinally. And unfortunately, that program didn't work out here in the city. So I went back to my wife and I said, I honestly think that we're being called to grow the food ourselves. And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I think we should become farmers. And she, looked at me like, we like, what are you doing here? You know what I mean?
What now, Dave?
Yeah, that's exactly. And she said, well, I don't even know, what the first thing is to do in farming. And I said, well, I've been around farming all my life as a kid.
Of course, yes.
And, a lot of my friends, during primary school and grade school, their parents were in corn and soy down there, and they were farmers. And I've been on farms a lot, so let me do some due diligence, And to be honest, you can't just go and buy a farm by a realtor. And, you have to look at, okay, how do you not only buy a farm, but really look at a business model, but also growing food that you can actually give up some of that profit, right, in order to feed people.
Right.
And so, look, as again, going back to way leads to way, right? It was Labor Day a few years back. I found an auction for a farm. It's down south, and we went to go and look at it, obviously, and I don't know about you, but you can't just go to any sort of bank to get pre-approved for buying a farm. It just doesn't work that way. And I couldn't tell you how many commercial banks I reached out to were like, Dave, you're crazy. And I, submitting my business plan to them too, and even said, even though this looks like a pretty good business plan, we're not going to do it because there's just too much risk involved. Right. And I say, I got it. So there was a wonderful partner of ours that specializes in helping young farmers get the financing they need. And 2 days before this auction, we were pre-approved. And we were and I said, even if we were pre-approved going into the auction, we may not win. Yeah. So you go down there, we met with the group, that the family that was working the ground there. And I went to him and I said, hey, I'm going to this auction. And he looked at me like I was, who's this brown skinned, city boy coming down here, coming in here saying, oh, you want to buy up this farm and then you want to do what? I said, yeah, I want to grow a lot of sweet corn and I want to give it away. And he just looked at me and he honestly just laughed. And I said, what's so funny? And he said, that sounds like the most ridiculous idea I have ever heard in my life. And I said, I know it sounds funny, but trust me, the benefits of doing this, even if we don't do it right or even if we fail, will be there. Trust me. He said, all right. He goes, let's just talk after, the auction, because there are a lot of people looking at the ground. And so we go to the auction. We win the auction. I'm just going to jump ahead because it's a cool story, but we win the auction. And his whole family was in the back room. And actually, our farm would have comprised quite a bit of revenue for them because they have been working that farm ground for generations. In fact, actually going back to Abraham Lincoln.
Wow.
And I went back to him and I said to him, if you are willing to help me with this food initiative I want to do, I would love to have you on board. And he said to me, Dave, you are one crazy son of a gun. But it was a little bit more, a direct response. But he said, let's do it. And instead of, breaking ground on, a small farmhouse for my wife and I, we invested into machinery, into trucks, into pallets, into, the logistic operations, because this is what we had planned. I wanted to grow the produce, pick it, pack it, and send it to where? The food banks. The food banks are wonderful major arteries in our state of Illinois to get food out to people who are hungry. So I'm going to give you just a few statistics. 1.4 million Illinoisans are hungry. So what does that mean? They don't know where their next meal comes from. They're food insecure. Of those 1.4 million, 400,000 of them are children. It's one thing to be food insecure and as an adult, but it's another thing as a child.
A growing, hungry child.
Exactly right. You are not the best of who you are. Can you imagine not having that caloric energy to learn, to play, to grow, to be who you want to be? And we know the data supports that if you don't get those nutritious elements that are comprised of fresh food during those critical years, your brain doesn't grow, let alone your physical stature.
So they're crazy statistics, because I would have just thought that we have such an obesity problem. I know Illinois is one of the most obese states.
Yep.
But that's wild. Isn't
it? And we'll get into, the concept of the waste that we have and how terrible the general diets are of our population. Because quite frankly, we have a food abundance problem in America. As crazy as it sounds, right? We just throw it away because we grow it and get it to areas that have already too much food.
Yes.
And then other areas who have no food. And that's why we call them food deserts or food apartheids. So the first year, we partnered with Feeding Illinois. They're great partners of ours because we thought that is the best way to get the food out to the people. So under the Feeding Illinois umbrella, they service 8 major food banks throughout the state of Illinois. You have the Greater Chicago Food Bank, Food Depository here in Chicago. Wonderful, wonderful entity that serves, so many people here in the Chicago area. But there are other food banks throughout Illinois that feed rural areas, right? Back in my home area, you know what I mean? You have the Peoria Area Food Bank. You have the Central Illinois Food Bank. You have, all these. So to serve those 1.4 million people, you got to get the food to them in a really logistical and orderly fashion. That's what the food banks do. So they're main arteries that supply down to the pantries. So you have banks and you have pantries. The pantries are what you envision.
Yes.
Down at the block is the local church pantry that gets the food from the food banks that get it out to the people in their home. And so we took that approach. So what happened the first year, we chose sweet corn for this reason. So while sweet corn is not the most nutritious fresh specialty produce, it tastes damn good. And one of the things that we wanted to do is to say, look, we're not only going to grow a great specialty crop like sweet corn, but my thesis is this: those most in need deserve the best. So what I could have been selling at a really high quality grocery store, I'm going to give away, because I'm not going to just, give the leftovers, right, that come off after you harvest that are lying on the ground. I'm going to grow the best sweet corn there is in the state, and I'm going to give it away. So we did that. And in the first year, we fed 150,000 people in the state. And we literally worked nonstop from, that early part of the season to grow and pick all of that corn. We have the Nayak Farms trucking fleet using our commercial drivers, and we would drive them up and down the highways to the food banks. Because in sweet corn, you really get only like a 6-week period of time where you can harvest it and get it out. And on top of that, you have to logistically make sure that if you deliver a truckload of sweet corn, they can move it to people that are going to eat it.
Right.
Because it goes bad in 3 days. So this is the cool part about what happened, because everyone's like, "Oh, Dave, this is amazing." And before, so just to put it in context, like the food banks, when people grew sweet corn, because if you're in, let's say, Inglewood, and you're a black family, when you take a bite of our sweet corn, you're going to ask, "Hey, where do I get more of it?" If you're in East St. Louis and you're Hispanic descent and you take a bite of our sweet corn, let's say through a salsa or quesadilla, you're going to say, "Man, I want some more of that." Or if you're in the rural area and you just take it off the husk, you peel the ears and you eat it, you're going to say, "Man, where do I get more sweet corn?" Because if I started with lima beans, this project would not have gotten off the ground.
Right. Because
Well,
it's too specialized.
our goal, yeah, exactly right. Start with something that is delicious and healthy, but then we can get into more specialty crops that are healthier. So this year we branched out into snap beans, green beans. Next year we're getting into more, high caloric, healthy fruits like berries. And what we're trying to do is to build a model that can be, lateralized in governments, because that's really where fresh food is given to people, is really through the USDA. And that's what Feeding America is. The USDA is a federal arm of the government that funds the food banks all across America. And we want to create a program that is scalable and reproducible. So going back to after we fed 150,000 people, I get a call from the White House. And the White House says, "Hey, Dave, you're kind of crazy here. You're like this farmer who's just growing stuff and giving it away." And I said, "Yeah, well, there's a method to my madness." So they said, "Well, the Biden administration is rolling out a plan to combat hunger by 2030. And we're putting together a conference in Washington, and we want you to come. You're going to be there with people like Google, Cisco, all of these like really Fortune 50 companies that are really going to take on the initiative to commit capital and resources to ending hunger by 2030. And we want you to come. And if you come, we want you to commit something too." So I went back to my wife and I said, "Well, look, the White House is thinking that we're, doing something good. That means we have to step up." And so it was then that we said, "You know what? If we fed 150,000 people, let's try to feed 1 million people." And my wife looked at me again and she goes, "You are nuts. Like, how are me and you, who really haven't learned much about farming, is going to take, a small family farm and feed 1 million people in our state?" I said, "Well, that's trust, right? That's, this sort of higher power of faith. And what we believe in is that we're called to serve. And that if you are called, things will happen to make it happen." So last year, this past season, actually, we fed 500,000 people.
Wow.
And we got into green beans. And I pushed our team at Nayak Farms because they've never grown before the sweet corn. They've never really grown. Green beans for sure. And next year in berries too. And what we did this year that was different is we went to the pantries, the churches, and the gardens. Because you can't depend on food banks to always give out that food to, let's say, the people down the street. And this is one rewarding aspect of giving away food. So, for example, went to Irving Park food bank. Food pantry, the Irving Park Food Pantry. And having a 32-foot reefer trailer of Nayak Farms coming down, that area is not the easiest thing in the world. But to see the lines around the food pantries that are getting longer and longer each day, to see those carts of sweet corn, like tons, every truckload has literally like anywhere between 12 and 22 tons of fresh produce of mine. Wow. We pick it and we deliver it the next day. And to see somebody who has never really eaten fresh produce like that, and I would grab an ear and rip off the husk and say, "Take a bite," and then you see the response. That's something that I will never forget. So, when I say that time when I go to bed, those are the images that I reflect on when I push myself to help more people, right? Because that's really what it is. I don't really reflect on anything that we've done because there's so much pain that we have to attack. I'm really, we report back to the White House frequently. We're on pace. Actually, we're ahead of pace to feed 1 million people in our state before 2025. And I couldn't be more grateful to the team at Nayak Farms, people behind the scenes, our truck drivers, our tenants who are just, working those long hours, getting out in the fields. And don't get me wrong, I love being in the fields and, out there and looking and, but really what we are doing here is, again, taking these pre-pilot programs and scaling up. So what I did last year was to say, look, how can we incentivize other farmers to do what we're doing, right? Because farmers really operate on really small margins, okay? And input costs are high. If you look at the war in Europe, in Ukraine, it's causing fertilizer prices to go exponentially up.
I did hear that.
If you look at our machinery costs, they're too high. Like, farmers, while they may be, wealthy because of the price of their land, they're not. They really work the ground, and they really are living really, humble lifestyles. You know what I mean? So what I said to myself was this: if they donate some of their produce to the food banks or yield equivalent. So let's say in Illinois, a lot of farmers just grow commercial corn and soybeans. That corn goes to feed and ethanol.
Right.
Feeds hogs and cows, and then ethanol. That's really the main two things that our commercial corn goes to. So if you can't grow that food that the people will eat, well, why don't you just weigh it and then cut that same check to the food banks? So I wrote a bill that I submitted last session to the Illinois State Legislature. It's called the Illinois Farmers Who Fight Hunger Act. So if you're a farmer and you give away produce to the food banks or produce equivalent up to $2,000, you could get a dollar for dollar tax credit. It's not a deduction, but you get $2,000 if you max that out.
Right.
So Illinois has a ton of farmers. And if you only took 20% of our farmers in Illinois who would do this and participate in this program, we would create 200 million new meals annually.
Wow.
Wrap your head around that.
It's
in
insane.
5 years, that's just 20% of farmers. Let's say we pushed it up to 50% of our farmers, because I do believe farmers are generous and they would want these tax deductions. We would create 1 billion meals, new meals annually, into food deserts. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so last year I worked really hard to get this in. It didn't get in. And you look at, and that's, one of the reasons why I'm running. Because there's a lot of hurdles, a lot of people with self-interest in the legislature and in politics in general who look at my program and be like, well, I got other things that I'm more focused on. Because everybody has passions, right?
Yes.
Like mine is food, mine's healthcare, mine's, bearing children. But that hurt me when we couldn't get it in. It was painful to watch my bill that would have created millions, hundreds of millions of new meals for people didn't get in. And so that's really one of the reasons why I'm running, is that there are a lot of hurdles in government that if we simplify problems and work with people, like my bill's bipartisan. All of my bills have been bipartisan.
Yeah, exactly.
I am a guy who really implements diplomacy. Doesn't matter who you are. If I think that you're person that I don't agree with professionally or personally, I'm still going to sit down with you, break bread with you, and figure out how we can help our community. That's what I firmly believe. So I'm hopeful this next session that we can pass this bill in order to get food to where it needs to be. But that's again, it goes back, create the programs small, scale up, figure out what works. I think that's a really key fundamental, secret sauce I take to anything I do in life, to be honest.
My head is swimming with memories of my youth. My mom used to make all the time, just boiled sweet corn, put 2 prongs in it, and then we would just eat it right off the cob with a little butter. But that business model you have is so incredible. Like, like you said, you start with the sweet corn concept. It's working. Now you're expanding. You're adding. That's someone can take that approach to almost any type of entrepreneurial venture. It's just such a great approach, and I can only imagine how frustrating that must be for you to not get that bill passed when it's obviously, like you said, it's bipartisan. It's a win-win. There doesn't seem to be any downside, and for whatever reason, it doesn't pass. Can we talk a little bit about how you get in, like how you, because you are the founding fathers wanted people like you in office. You know, one of my biggest pet peeves in the US, my biggest frustrations is obviously the lobbyists, and then just the two-party system, the bickering, where you're just fighting about everything. It makes the US very tribal. We're very, very divided right now. And we need more people like you, where you're not trying to be a career politician. You're not trying to go into politics worth nothing and then be worth 100 million in a few years through, shady business ventures. You are the ideal. I think anyone listening to this, and anyone that meets you, and anyone that talks to you, and anyone that knows of you, are going to want people like you in office, because you are exactly who we need to make society so much better. How hard is it? How hard is it to win? What are you up against, and what gives you the biggest chance of success?
Great questions, and I will lay out the challenges that we are facing as a new candidate, right? This is my first rodeo. It's not going to be my last. But also, the type of environment Chicago politics and Illinois politics is, right?
Notoriously corrupt. That's what it's known for.
Absolutely. And we've seen it in historical, arenas of government, right? From, career politicians being in jail, on the news.
Yes.
And I will say it causes an even more apathy of many people in our communities who say, you know what, I don't want to get involved with politics. And, we've knocked on so many doors, and it's hard to sometimes get a response because there is a universal or close to it feeling by our constituents that they don't want to become involved in it because it is so nefarious. It is so nepotistic. It is, an arena that encompasses quite a bit of psychopathology too. You talk about access to disorders like narcissism, psychopathy, sadism, Machiavellianism, right?
I'm so glad you said that, because that's exactly the way I see it too. And you're the opposite of all of that. You're someone with such a good heart who's already feeding, like you said, 500,000 people you're helping. You've done so much your whole life, aside from, being a good father and husband. Your whole life is about helping people, really helping people. And then you're going in this arena. You seem like, I don't know you too well, but you seem like just such a good guy. And you're going in this arena. You're surrounded by, like you said, all the negative traits, the psychopaths.
You have the dark tetrad, right?
Yes.
And if you look at that sort of psychopathology, you would say, like my wife would say to me, what the hell are you doing? Like, why do you want to run for office? And I give this same answer, because it's the right thing to do. So many times we have been in a position of the Good Samaritan, right? So you have the other two in this parable that come down this winding, treacherous road, and they see a person who's just been robbed and bleeding and battered on the roadside. And the first two people that came there, they naturally ask the question, right? If I help this person, what will happen to me? And that's exactly what has happened in our community. It was the Good Samaritan who came and asked this question. If I don't help this person, what will happen to him? And that is something that has been lost in our community as a whole, that we reflexively ask this question, man, if I'm going to help this person, what's really going to happen to me? We have to reverse this. We have to have that mentality. We have to have leaders that invoke this ethos. And if we don't, then all is potentially lost, because those dark tetrad characteristics are very predominant in our leaders today. And what it lends itself to is the creation of many powerful frameworks of legislation and rules and laws that end up hurting our communities as a whole.
Yes.
And for myself, in order to become in a position of more responsibility, we have to lead by example and actions, right? I always say actions speak a lot louder than words. So when I'm running for a position, while I do present a vision of where I see our district, our Senate District 20 going, I can tell you that if you want to compare me to those I'm running against, look at my record.
Yes.
Look at what we've done.
Well, anyone looking at the black and white, you're a shoo-in. I mean, who's going to come close to the record that you have? But that's not, politics is not always that easy, right? So do you know, you said it's in March?
March 19th is the primary. And
Gotcha.
So we're running for the Senate District 20, which comprises a large area of the northwest side of Chicago, right? So you have West Lincoln Park, goes north to Albany Park, loops around to Belmont Cragen on that west side, and the south boundaries are Bucktown and Logan Square and everything in between. There are very diverse communities, right? If you're in Belmont Cragen, many times if you call 911, the police don't respond. There are many areas where people don't have access to food, healthcare, shelter, clothing. What I personally feel as an inalienable right of being a human being. These individuals and families are devoid of that. You have other areas that are really suffering from gun violence, from homelessness, from our migrant humanitarian crisis, but more importantly, economic contraction. I think anybody who's listening to this podcast right now can universally agree that when you go to the grocery store, it's more expensive. Your rent costs have gone up. Your deductibles on your healthcare insurance are astronomical in addition to what you do pay for health insurance. Childcare, it's too expensive. Many times families are figuring out, all right, do I pay for this prescription medication or do I feed my kids? I mean, these are the realities that are happening. And, you know, the narrative that you hear from the government and on, you know, mainstream media is that, oh, everything is rosy. But the fact is it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yes.
And we need leaders in office who not only have a concrete vision about how we get people back to work, how we grow small businesses, how we build vertically, how we empower those communities around us, right? By getting them safety nets, right? Like free clinics. We need more free clinics. There's a way to do it that doesn't cost the state that much, but what it does on the front end, on the back end, we save the state billions.
That's what's so ironic is the things that if you had a unlimited checkbook almost, in the long run, you'd actually save the state so much money by these policies.
And we can argue that the federal government has an unlimited checkbook,
right?
Which is actually interesting because the fact is that our society is what we call very high time preference oriented, right? High time preference, low time preference, right? High time preference in terms of tangible wealth, materialistic items. I will go out and, you know, want that euphoria right up front instead of actually working hard and really going through resilience and pain and troubles in order to get something that is of significant value to me, like relationships, like growing myself in terms of who I am and the truth of who I am. I think these are the things that we need to look at. Now, look, I will say that my foray into politics has been nothing short of me trying to take a drink out of an open fire hydrant. But I've done that before in my life, and I've been thrown into deep ends, and I've swam effectively, efficiently to whereby we navigate these tortuous and trepidation, you know, and a lot of choppy waters. We've done that. I will say that it's resonating. It's resonating with the people in my district. It's resonating with people in Chicago and in the state of Illinois, that they understand who I am, right? I'm a person who's loyal. I'm a person who, when I see you and talk with you, genuinely wants to know what pain you're experiencing. And then from there, not only ask how I can help, but figure out ways that I can reduce your pain. And I think that's the job of a leader, is to create an environment that is a community whereby we help each other out when we're in need. And so many politicians, because it's hard for me even to think that I'm a politician because of such a negative valence of emotion I feel when you tell me that, like, oh, here's a politician. Like, I get, like, as anybody would, you have a natural tendency to be leery. You have a natural tendency to be like, man, that person is probably out for themselves, and how are they using it to enrich themselves? Literally, that's almost every politician that I've experienced.
But Dave, I would say you're a incredible man of character. You're a father and a husband and an entrepreneur who's the ideal person we want in politics to buck the trend against the typical sleazy politician that people despise so much. So like you're like this breath of fresh air, and the only obstacle you have is getting the word out more and getting your name out more, and that's it. Because you don't have to change anything about you. Like you said, your character and your past track record speak for itself. So all that, I feel like the mission for you, and not trying to give you advice, but it's just getting you out there. I
couldn't agree more. You are, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so appreciative and humbled to be here today talking with you, is that it allows us in a long format platform for people to understand who I am, what I stand for, but also to have other people tell their friends, their family about me. Hey, I ran into Dr. Dave, and like, this is who he stands for, who he's helped. Because quite frankly, we need to translate that into a movement for people who are naturally inclined to either not vote at all, right? Because they've been so disenfranchised and have apathy towards our elected leaders, or those that vote are going to vote with people who are, to be candid, influenced by millions of dollars being spent on mailers and, digital ads and TV ads. We're a grassroots campaign. Right now, I haven't taken $1 from PACs. So why? Well, I don't want somebody's hand in my pocket saying, look, we're going to have you, we'll give you this money or this, amount of, influence on this area, but this is what you have to do for us. No, that's unethical. We have run a campaign that is rooted in service for people. It hasn't been easy, raising money from, our friends and family, but also committing our personal capital to this, in a very difficult time, right? Economically, it is unrealistic for me to go around asking people for their money when they need to choose between prescription medications and food. We have the funds to run a fiscally responsible campaign that's there. But you're absolutely right. In the institutions of Illinois politics and Chicago politics, so much money is spent on either drowning out other candidates or making other candidates who are clearly unqualified qualify. And you pull a fast one, right? On voters. They get into the ballot box, they vote, and then 6 months later, you're like, man, that wasn't the greatest vote I casted. Do you know what I mean? And that's really our job over the next 12 weeks, is to tell our story so that people can make the most well-informed choice of who the candidates are. Me, I'm biased. I think I'm the most qualified.
Of course.
We are ready to lead. We have led, and that seat in the Senate affords us the opportunity to leverage what we've done in the past to help such a greater amount of people.
Exactly. You have the proven track record of what you're doing, the effectiveness, the good it's doing. Now that this seat will just allow you to leverage it even more. So
that's exactly right. And look, I'm not naive to the difficulties of working in government and how turning the ship is much like turning the Titanic. But this is really the importance of having dialogue with people, of people who are different than us, to sit down and to understand new opinions, and even to work with people who we thought we would never work with. And how do we do that? I'll tell you. So we've knocked on thousands of doors. What I will say is the conclusion of this. 85% of us agree that we should have a good wage, a roof over our head, clothes on our back, food on the table. Honestly, indisputable. 15% are kind of caught really hung up on really divisive issues. If we're talking about abortion, gun control, you know what I mean?
Yes.
These are things that are really amplified too. Instead of actually saying like, look, whether you're Republican or Democrat, I'll be candid with you. Everybody agrees. People should be fed.
Exactly.
And not only when you have access to food, it should be fresh food. There's hard to press, like, people are not going to go around saying, oh, you need surgery, but we can't give it to you. I don't think that's right. Do you know what I mean? But what we've done is we've created, as you said before, especially in Washington and even in Springfield too, lobbyists have a lot of influence over our elected officials. A lot. And we need to talk about how much influence they have over writing our laws. For me, I've been a person who has independently thought about how to construct solutions, but have relied on experts in their various fields to say, hey, Dave, maybe you think of it this way, think of it that way. But what I've done is I've done the work. And so many politicians become complacent. Write this bill for me, or who's doing this, or let me focus on just fundraising for the next race. Or let me focus on, cultivating these relationships that give me the highest chance of winning re-election. Instead of actually being like, man, I'm in the chair.
Yeah.
I have a limited amount of time.
What's the maximum good I can do in this short
That's
time?
exactly right. And that's the same aspect as I would put on myself as I have for the last many years. That time is your most precious asset. Leverage it. Do as much good as you can do in that short period of time, because you never know when you wake up and it's your last day walking this earth.
Dave, you're so inspiring. I just want you to know, we'll talk more off air, but let me know what I can do the next 12 weeks, because I want to get behind you with my limited capacities. But I'm so inspired. Listening to you talk, I just wish we had, a president of this country with that kind of mindset, because so many people will say the same thing. They're just so depressed, the state of affairs. And it's so true. I think it's probably more like 90% or 95%. We agree. Both sides agree. But we've been these institutions, these lobbyists, there's so many people that are financially profiting over keeping us divided. And that just makes me so sad, because, not just in the US, but humans everywhere in every country in the world want all the same basic things, but there's these powerful influences that love to keep us divided and fighting amongst ourselves, whereas both sides, left and right, bought by lobbyists. So it's
and I think that's really what I'm trying to reinforce to others, right? Is that we actually agree on a lot of things, even within the Democratic Party, right? Because we have quite a bit of division in our own party.
Yes.
As a Democrat, it saddens me to think that we have others in our party who are Democrats who consistently fight and argue and really engage in things like, reputation savagery,
Yes.
Estrangement, bullying. And then that can sometimes be done over modalities like social media, right? Just eviscerate you because you take a stance on a democratic fundamental ideal that we can bring down members of our own group, right? For what? Again, that's the access to psychopathology you see in a lot of elected officials and those in those orbits. What I will say is this. If we are to push our communities forward to create a better society for those members, but more importantly, for our children and our grandchildren. You and I both were 44. I'm on the back half of my life. I'm not a perfect person by any means. I say this to people even as a deacon in my church. Like, I always say this. Churches are hospitals for sinners. They're not museums for saints. And there's truth to that, right? Like, I go to church because I'm a sinner. Like, that's why I go to church, is to become a better person. And I will be the first to tell you that I have flaws and that I am far from perfect. And that's what makes me a human being. But I can improve on them. if we have this notion that our elected officials are a part of us, they're just regular people. Like, I got a mortgage. I got 2 kids that sometimes I have no clue how to parent, especially during these tween years when I don't know if my kid hates me or loves me each day. You know what I mean? Like, being a husband and a good, faithful servant to my family and to my community has sometimes been a balancing act. Like any person out there trying to hustle away and make it in life. I get it. And I think that's the one thing that separates a lot of real elected officials is the fact that you have to understand the pain that people are going through. Like, I know what it feels like to take care of a sick parent. My mom had leukemia. I took care of her for years, even when she was a paraplegic and in a wheelchair and needed 24-hour care. You don't understand what ADA accessible ramps and taxi cabs and bathrooms are until you have a family member or yourself to deal with these things, and why we need more skilled nursing facilities and care, and why we need to improve benefits for family members who are taking care of sick family members. Like, it's one thing to be in the chair to write legislation, but it's another thing to understand really what people are going through. Like, we've dealt with cancer in our family. We've dealt with, sick children. We've dealt with sick parents. We've dealt with, for years I slept on a fold-out couch with my wife as my kids would have the bedrooms so that they could get a full 8 hours of sleep so I wouldn't wake them in the morning while moonlighting 100 hours a week to make sure the kids had enough money to go to daycare so that my wife could stay home instead of having a second income. Right. Like, I know what it's like to grow up with parents who didn't speak the native language, who was balancing different cultures at home while going to school and trying to understand that. These are things that you want in your elected official, right? That is to say that they're not only human beings, but they've experienced difficulties, they've experienced tragedy, they've experienced the pain, right? Because again, going back to my initial thesis, right? Life is a series of just painful events, but we have to recognize those times when that pain is blunted by great things of joy, of happiness, of love that are fostered by relationships that are around us. So when you're living this life that's so short, make sure every day that you are surrounding yourself with people that are of a valid use of your time. Don't waste it away, but people sucking it away from you, because I will tell you, they will suck the time away from you, and you will wake up one day and say, man, why did I waste that time? And that what that is too is regret. And that's a huge fear that I have, right? You just don't want to be regretful.
Dave, we're such kindred spirits. I sometimes laugh at myself because I'm 44, but sometimes I feel like I'm 94. I'm so concerned about not wanting regrets when I'm older and appreciating time and the time that I have to do things. And no one exemplifies that more than you, and it's really beautiful.
Yeah, so look, I encourage people, listening and watching to check out our website, drdavnayak.com, drdavnayak.com. You can find us on social media too, IG, Twitter. Check out our website. I think that once people start to understand not only who I am, but what we represent, people will say, that Dr. Dave, he's doing something that I can appreciate, because really what you have to do when you go into the ballot box and you're faced with options, some people don't do this. It's more of a gut sort of instinct, but who is the best person to do the job at that time? And I think that's really what I ask for everybody in the community now. You may not vote for me, but go and vote. Our forefathers and mothers and relatives and people who have passed on before us fought so hard for this wonderful ability for us to vote. Yes. And to put in our elected officials who are responsible for guiding our city, our state, and our nation. And if you don't do that, then you really don't have the right to complain, right? I mean, that's really how I feel. Don't complain to me. If you didn't vote, then you are not exercising your constitutional right to elect those leaders who you think can help us the most.
And I'll just add to that, vote for Dave, because he's going to make Chicago a lot better. He's going to help a lot of people. So, Dave, this is so humbling. I'm so inspired. And like I said, I want to try and do a little part to help you. And hopefully I can get some other people behind me, because you're an amazing man. You really are. You're so inspirational. You're so genuine. And you've got the heart of a lion, and you're doing so much good already. I can only imagine the kind of good that you can do with the bigger options in Congress. So thank you so much for the time, really.
Lawrence, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and to tell our story, to learn more about you, and look forward to what the future has for the both of us too.
I love that. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks.